finally laid to rest the remains of two unknown soldiers of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. They represent the hundreds of soldiers who lie buried in these battlefields of Flanders, and the many whose remains have yet to be given a formal burial.
We'd been married not quite 2 years at that stage. He was just special and very kind and considerate. And of course, you know, it was a huge loss when he wasn't there.
You, Lord, only are immortal, the creator and maker of all, and we are mortal, formed of the earth. And unto earth shall we return. For so you did ordain when you created us, saying, dust thou art, and unto dust shall you return.
You can't lose good men and not be affected by it. Anybody who says they're not affected by it, I don't believe them. I don't believe them at all.
Give rest, O Christ, to your servants, where sorrow and pain are no more, but life everlasting.
I have a grandson called Michael now. He was not quite 20, just a couple of years younger than my brother was when he was killed. And I think anyone who was bereaved in the war would have the same feelings of affection, sadness, pride, and try to draw the lessons from it.
It is strange, isn't it, that somebody that you knew so long ago should almost be should still be one of the most important people in your life. I had a job at the Blaby Rural District Council, and Norman was working with the engineer and surveyor upstairs, and there he was, and he was a golden boy, and I couldn't believe this at all. He would be 19, 20, and he had a little Ford 8, and he used to come through the village and pick me up, and we'd go off to the office together. And that was the summer before the war broke out. I can see now that his parents were looking forward to us being married and there being a child, because his mother crocheted a very large shawl, which she put away and said, you know, that's for the future. And our expectations of what was going to happen to our lives were so totally different from what happened during the war and after, of course. He said, if I followed my inclinations, I would register as a conscientious objector. But he said, I've always wanted to go to sea, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into the Merchant Navy, and I would like to go up to Preston to the Wireless Training College and do my training. He was a happy person, and he was also he loved me and I loved him. And I think we still had a very great deal to say to one another. We were growing up. was in a room looking down over the canal in Leicester, and it was a late afternoon and the sun was setting over the canal. And it was about between 4 and 5 o'clock. And I thought, perhaps when I go outside, Norman's car will be there. And actually it was just the time that the convoy was being attacked. And they were very much in my mind. I remember where I was, absolutely, at that time. What we heard was that the ship was missing. We really just lived hoping that we were going to hear that he was a prisoner, had been picked up, and that he was a prisoner of war. But as that year went by, I began to think that I had to do something, and I joined what was called being a mobile member, a full-time mobile member of the Red Cross. And I'm quite sure that I saw myself being posted to some hospital or place where maybe they were bringing prisoners of war in, and I would find Norman amongst these people coming. I couldn't begin to take it in at all. I couldn't believe that this was happening. We didn't really know, you see, that the ship had blown up. And of course, in retrospect, this is one of the ironies of war, isn't it? That Norman was thinking that he wanted to do something that was useful in the war, but it was that his ship was carrying explosives. But I lost him. I lost this person that we were growing together. It got lost. I joined the Society of Friends, the Quakers, 25 years ago, trying to find a way of making sense of life, not in any way denigrating anything that those who have fought in our wars have done, because I'm so aware of their personal bravery, but with a hatred of war. And I think most women do.
That was the dress I wore for my presentation to King Edward VIII, 1936. No, was it Prince of Wales? Anyway, he was sitting in a sort of throne in the garden with a red carpet in front, and all the little Debs had to trip along and do their well-practiced curtsy in front. When I was 3 away from doing my curtsy in the line-up, the heavens opened and the rain descended, an enormous thunderstorm. So I didn't do my curtsy, everybody scurried to the tea tents, and I consoled myself with lovely pink strawberry ice cream, I remember. Oh, I had a lovely time. Apart from that, I was never allowed to go anywhere. In those days, girls were, like me, were kept with governesses and with nannies and governesses and companions. You were never allowed off the lead. Once I started flying, that was a bit of freedom. I loved to fly. Wonderful, wonderful to be able to fly. Then, when the war came, with the great shortage of pilots, they got me as well. Social life in London was absolutely fantastic. Everybody went out, everybody came on leave there, and you had a lot of friends, and London, in spite of the bombs, nobody took any notice of the bombs falling down. Well, you didn't think you were going to be bumped off like other people were. We were flying little light aircraft, little Magisters. So that's when I met my fiancé. He was called Humphrey Gilbert, he was called. He was, to me, extremely attractive, full of vitality, of course. Well, it went on for about 2 months, 3 months, something like that. Time is difficult to remember. He was only 22. I was 23, I suppose, by then. And we decided we'd get married. It was a very intense romance. It was just after the Battle of Britain. He fought from the Battle of Britain right the way through. And they were given a leave day when they weren't going to fly. And this was the day he was coming up to London. We were going to discuss things. And he didn't turn up in London. I thought I'd been stood up. And I rang up his aerodrome, and I was passed from one person to another, and nobody told me anything. The next day I had a job which flew me over his aerodrome, just as it happened. And I couldn't find his aircraft. He was leader, he was squadron leader. He had a Spitfire with a blue nose, and I couldn't find this blue nose Spit in the standings. So I thought, perhaps he stuck out, perhaps he shot down. In the end, finally I got on, and eventually I was told that he'd been killed. It was an extraordinary time to meet somebody like that, in a way, and you thought it was going to work out and go on, and it didn't. It hurt too much. I didn't think about it. When I thought about it, it made me unhappy, so I didn't think about it. I chucked it away and thought about something nice instead. Two and a half years afterwards, I found out, by chance, apparently on this day off that these young men had been given, he had been larking around, and he took up not a young little waif on his lap, but a great big aircraft controller man. And they never properly got off the ground. That was the end of both of them. What a waste.
Ladies and gentlemen, workers, playtime!
I can remember the house where we lived, very old slum area. I can always remember my mother having to go to the pawn shop to take clothing and even my father's suit to put meals on the table. We were so poor, and I don't remember too much about the area, you know. I know it was very old. I can remember the streets around there being very narrow and things like that, little sweet shops and cake shops, but it wasn't much of an area to live in.
Diesmal geht es gegen das Zentrum der englischen Rüstungsindustrie. Über Coventry.
When the Blitz started, my mother took us all to the shelter. She was terrified and crying, and my father was a little bit of a drinker. And he was up the road in the pub, which was only not very far away. And then everybody was running, panicking to get to shelters or get their families somewhere. And we went there, and my mother was saying, "Get somebody to go and get your dad." I'll always remember that. She was screaming. She was terrified. She just got the three of us and she was having another baby. My father came down. If my father had stopped in the pub, he wouldn't have got killed. My father came down, done the proper thing, came down to be with us. As soon as he got in, we had a direct hit. It was one of the first raids on civilians in Coventry. Well, my father and young Frank had just started school. My father died that day when the bomb, and Frank did. My mother was taken to Coventry Warwickshire Hospital and she died the next day. She did. My brother Paddy, he really suffered, he did, for that bombing. He really had it worse than what I did. You know, he had a very bad head injury and never had much of a life at all, really. My dad's brother, Uncle Christy, he decided to send my brother to Ireland to live with my grandfather. And I came back to Coventry to stop with my uncle. I didn't see Paddy for 3 years. We were sort of brought up, I know he's my brother, I'll never forget that, but we was brought up as like two separate boys. And he didn't talk like me, he talked like an Irishman. He died last year, just 12 months ago, and he still sounded like an Irishman. My wife used to say, "Your brother's Irish." And he came over here and went to work straight away. But we didn't have anything in common, me and my brother. We didn't go out with each other when we was in our teens because we were so different. It was sad, really. I was very conscious of being an orphan. Because when I used to go to the school, a Catholic school, they used to say, this is an orphan boy who lost his parents in the Blitz. Even my uncle used to call me an orphan, even when I was 14 and 15. But he used to take me to the London Road Cemetery and show me where my parents were buried with over 800 other people in a mass grave. He didn't like to go up there too much. Tears used to come to his eyes because it brought it all back to him. For a few years, I didn't go to the cemetery. And when I got married, I started to go again. Me and my wife go there every year when they have a service there. I never called my uncle father, I always called him Uncle Kit. I couldn't bring myself to call him father, even though he did his best for me, because he wasn't my father. I never ever had the opportunity to call father my dad, or my mother, which I've missed in life, really.
I'm lying down at full length here in the cornfield. Just in the hedges around me, I can see many men taking shelter behind the banks wearing their steel helmets, while the terrific barrage goes on around us.
In the event of my death, please forward to Mrs. H.G. Williams, 10 Terrace Road, Wood Green, London, N22. And I always think of Wood Green as our courting ground. That was my life until I was 28. I was 25 when he was killed, and Herbert was 27, coming up to 28.
All the guns of the fleet, the shells are whistling overhead now, just listen to them.
The 22nd of June, 44. Dear Pearl, darling, I hesitate to write this letter in case I'm misunderstood, inasmuch that you may think me dramatic. That is not so. This letter will be with me wherever I go, so that, should I fall in action, it will be sent to you. I've often told you how I love you, and I say so again. I want to spend my life telling you. We have been married 3 years, and though few, they have been wonderful. When you married me, darling, I attended my greatest ambition. It was as if I had reached for the moon and got it. From that moment you became my reason for living. Believe me when I say I have never ceased to love and worship you. It would be foolish for me to say, don't grieve for me, dear, because I know you will. But even so, try not to take it too hard, if only for the sake of Howard, who with his coming sealed the bond of our marriage. He is a wonderful boy, Pearl, darling. Should I be in sunshine or in a mud hole in hell, I shall be thinking of you, darling. Goodbye, sweetheart. Life with you was very sweet. I can never express my gratitude for you. Yours forever and a day, your loving husband, Griff. When I had to choose a thing to be put on their stone, well, I put, may the winds of heaven blow softly on this quiet and lonely place. And that's on the stone forever. That. You have to live with it, don't we? And carry on, really live with it. And I've forced myself. I don't think I would have lived. I would wanted to have lived if I hadn't have got my 2 boys. That meant everything to me.
Well, I was a second son, and my elder brother Michael, who was 3.5 years older than me, was a very sweet guy. I'm very, very devoted to him. He was very mechanical. He invented things, and we had an awful lot of fun at home together. We knew as we approached 1939 that war was coming, because I was born in a political family. I remember hearing Hitler's broadcast from Nuremberg. I went out in the streets one day in 1935 and saw the fascists marching by in their black shirts, and it frightened me. We sat together when Chamberlain announced the beginning of the war, and knew it was coming. It was inevitable, but we felt it could have been avoided. And, of course, then my brother joined the Air Force. My father was, at the time, 63. He'd been a pilot in the First World War, and he rejoined, ended up as an air gunner before they caught up with him and grounded him. And I joined the Air Force. So the war absorbed our whole family life. War is 99% boredom and 1% of real danger. But during the periods of boredom, you talk. And I learned far more from my time in a troop ship and going to Africa and coming back and talking to people than ever I did at college or university or even in Parliament. And so the victory of 1945 was already predetermined by what the servicemen and women had said to each other. And I remember going out to Africa in a troop ship, we agreed to have a meeting on war aims. And I had to go and see the officer commanding troops. I was only an aircraft from second class, which was the lowest grade. And I said, we want to have a meeting on war aims. And he said, no politics in it, Ben, is there? And I said, oh, no, sir. And then we went back and discussed how we could build a better world. I couldn't believe my luck that I was paid 2 shillings a day to fly at the age of 18. I mean, it was, you know, you felt like Biggles with your tiger moth and your goggles and your cup of cocoa, and you went out in the morning and they pulled away the chocks and you took off and did your aerobatics. I mean, it was unbelievable. That wasn't anything really to do with war. But I did feel a very deep commitment to victory against Hitler. The last time I saw my brother was in January 1943, I guess, and he was a pilot and I was going out to train. And then in the summer of 1944, when I was in Africa learning to fly, I corresponded with him. I've kept all his letters, which are lovely letters. He was a very sensitive man. And then D-Day came. And on the 23rd of June, he took off on a mission. It was actually an accident. The engineers had forgotten to take the little thing off the airspeed indicator, so when he took off with his bombs, he didn't know how fast he was flying. And he dropped his bombs in the sea and came back and then hit the seawall down at RAF Tangmere and was killed. And I had a telegram. It didn't arrive till a bit later. And I got the telegram when I was in a class, a meteorology class. At the beginning, they came with the messages from home, and I read the message that I had received, and I had to sit there for an hour, knowing he'd been killed, and I was very, very, very distressed. And then later, of course, I had a letter from him, his last letter before he was killed, which came after I'd heard he was dead, and it made a very profound impact on me, and still does. I still grieve over him and think about him and remember him. And his letters were about war and the horrors of war. And of course many of my school friends and his were killed and friends were killed. He was cremated and his ashes were put in a little family grave in a church in Essex. And it's just a little stone. It says Lieutenant Michael Ben, DFC. He had a DFC, a Distinguished Flying Cross. I think cremation releases you from the idea that it's the physical body. It allows you to concentrate on the memory. Other people take a different view. But however you do it, you have to release yourself from the image and remember the person. He wrote to me about the war, about how awful he felt it was, and how he felt it was necessary, but he said he was a Christian. I think he would have been a Christian minister if he'd lived. That's what he wanted to do. But I suppose really now, at my age, and I'm 77 and he would have been 80 this year, I'm 76 and he would have been 80 this year, I suppose a retired minister, you think of what he would have been, but also you think of the influence that he's had on your life ever since. There's nothing that's happened that I haven't thought of in relation to him and what he would have said and what he would have done. He was a very principled person and a very kindly person, and left a huge unfillable gap, which I think is true of anyone if you love them very much. The day that Hitler surrendered, I was with 3 of my colleagues. We went to the Sea of Galilee and hired a rowing boat. And we rowed on the Sea of Galilee, and we landed at Capernaum. And when we landed, an old Jew said, "The war is over." I've never forgotten it. And that night we went back to the kibbutz, and there were all these refugees from all over Europe, and we danced all night. All the different nationalities of the Jews danced. Jews will dance the German national dance. And they said the 3 English pilots will now dance an English national dance. And we danced, but all we could think of was Bumps a Daisy, which I believe is still very popular in the Sea of Galilee. It was a mixture of excitement and sadness, and you thought of all the people who died.
Mark was 29. He was an old man, really, I suppose, and he was killed. Especially when you go around the cemeteries and see the 18-year-old lads, you know. Suppose he was an old man. Well, I always buy pink roses to put on the grave because my wedding bouquet was pink roses. And now I talk to him and tell him what's happened and about the family and what's happened, who's living, who's dead, and all the bad. I think I'm mad, but that's me. When seeing him there, the grave, you know, you're sort of crying inside, and I don't know, it's just, what's he doing here? He's dead. And I think, well, when anything happens to me, when I die, will Mark still be a young man? It's mad, isn't it? It's daft. I've thought that many times. We had, I suppose, what we considered 3 years of honeymoons, because all we had was when he came home. I mean, I had to go out on war work, and he used to come home on leave, and we used to go off out with all the pals and friends, you know. And then, of course, I became pregnant. He knew I was pregnant. David was born July 43. Mark had gone abroad then, North Africa, and 44, he was killed in Italy. Donzio. I know I can have my ashes buried with Mark, if I want to. I was talking to my vicar a while ago, and he just looked and he said, "Millie, does it matter where your ashes are buried?" He said, "Because your soul's already gone." You know, I hadn't thought about that. I got that deep into it. So I don't know, probably I won't go and be buried with him. But I know I can, if I want. You wonder whether he'll be a young man. Little old woman, you know.
Korea never left me. Korea never left me at all. I would be, I'd be in a Moscow and I'd mentally be back on there. I'd be up on the river, I'd be in the camp. It never ever left me until about 40 years after. I was involved in giving a lecture about the Korean War, and I delivered this lecture and gave him a talk on life in prison camp. And next morning when I got up, I thought, my God, there's something wrong here. I'd slept through, I'd never ever thought about Korea the whole night. And yet, for 40 years, it had never ever left me. I had reason to talk to a counsellor, and he said, it's the only way you'll get rid of it, is talk about it. We'd no idea what the war was all about. It was a place 13,000 miles away from England. It had never been brought up in our history lessons. We didn't even know what it was when we were going there. And we'd just no idea that it was such a hermit kingdom. I wanted to go. I wanted to get out of the place and see somewhere else in this world other than Dewsbury, and which were very, very limited mills and hills and very dowdy place. And out there in that far east, the sun seemed to shine every day. The sailing to Singapore were out of this world. It's the most beautiful port in the world to sail into. It seemed like you sailed into an Hollywood movie. It was just incredible. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. But to finish on such carnage as we saw in Korea, what an experience. Absolutely what an experience. I don't think you get frightened until bullets start flying about, and you see people wounded and you see people hurt and men killed. And that's when you realise that what you really let yourself in for, or what you're being put in for. They pounded us with 2-inch mortars, and we pulled back off the hilltop, and they said, oh, Keith's missing, and Rifleman Brennan ran round and he got Keith on his back and he brought him out and he gave him to me. He said, you'll have to carry him down. Carry him down is your buddy. And I carried him down the hill to where the remainder of our company was on the MSR, on the main supply route. I carried him down there, and halfway down the hill the stretcher bearers came, and I had him on the floor and he just died in my arms. So that's when you realise that it's a serious business, war is. Oh dear, oh dear. But that's it, a young man, 19 years old, barely 20. Terrible. Immediately after it happened, you have to concentrate on what you're doing as a soldier, and you can't let it get to you at all. And it was after in the quiet moments when you think about it. That's when memories return to it and you think about all the laughing you did, and then how it suddenly come to an end. he passed into captivity, and you start laughing again, and you realise what it's all about, and you survive. You have to survive. The Chinese had no idea of how modern life we lived. Just as an example, one day I remember an instructor saying to a friend of mine, Mr. Briggs, Don Briggs, my best buddy, he said, your wife, Mr. Briggs, goes to the pictures. He says, she does. She goes down to ABC. He said, why for she not go in a rickshaw? He said, how do you mean? She goes by taxi. He says, yes, I know she go by taxi. It says in your letter. Why'd she not go by rickshaws? He says, we've no bloody rickshaws in Wakefield. And such was that man could not conceive a city like what we lived in, what didn't have transport of rickshaws. And yet this was a man with a degree in English and a great astronomer. And yet he couldn't understand there were no rickshaws in Wakefield.
I don't think that I've ever really stopped thinking about Dave. I mean, I don't mean I'm thinking, every day about him. I mean, at first it was, but every so often something will just happen and it just takes you back and makes you think. Obviously, I mean, I was 25 when he was killed, and I've changed quite a lot since then. And, sometimes something as basic as, well, I wonder what he'd look like now. Because obviously I've got photos of him from then. But how he would have been at the age of 44, I don't know. He was always very keen on tradition and the proper way to do things. And I think the Navy, for him, sort of epitomised that. So he decided to join up straight from school.
Darling Christine, how I love you so very much and think of you much of the time. Thinking of you makes me feel happy, and I often have dreams where we're going off in your new car, doing lots of fun things and having great adventures. I'm looking forward to when I can put my dreams into practice.
He was very affectionate in his letters, and he was very open about his feelings. And so, of course, yes, you sort of responded to that, thinking, yeah, that's really nice that you can write that, and, yes, I love you too, and this sort of thing. And at the back of all of that was the worry, that what was going to happen, and would he actually come back?
Darling Christine, I love you very much indeed, and I hope that you're not worrying about it all. It is much easier for me here, because it really is very exciting. But I know how I would feel if you were away. Rest assured that even if the worst happens, I'm in one of the best places in the ship. I shall be in the hangar or on the flight deck all the time. The hangar is the best protected place, with thick double doors, and the life rafts are right next to us. The good thing about it is, there seems stacks of time left for some sort of compromise, which I'm sure will happen.
His opinion hardened in that he began to think far more that it was a complete waste of time, and that lives shouldn't be put at risk for such an occurrence.
Darling Christine, reality is dawning rapidly. At times, the situation seems so absolutely silly. Here we are in 1982, fighting a colonial war on the other side of the world. 28,000 men going to fight over a fairly dreadful piece of land. inhabited by 1,800 people. After it's all over and millions of pounds have been expended, they'll be left in peace, having had their homes destroyed by shelling, and the 28,000 men will then go away again. Moreover, one side has supplied the other with its weapons, so that the war could be started in the first place.
Having said that, he was very loyal, so he wouldn't ever not have done what was his duty, in effect, because I suppose he was a good team player and wouldn't let down any of his comrades.
I personally do not want to kill any Argentinians or anybody else. It is a very unreal time. All the preparations for war are carried out which one thinks of as happening in war films only, but are actually happening now. It is almost like a gigantic spoof.
I was a serving officer. I was waiting to go into a regimental dinner. So we were all there in our mess kit and everything, and it was late. And normally these dinners are spot on time. So we think, gosh, you know, what's happening? It's half an hour late, what's going on? And then the CO's wife came in and she said, oh, Christine, could the CO just have a quick word with you? So I went out into one of the side rooms, and it was the commanding officer who told me that they'd had news that Dave had been killed.
The destroyer HMS Glamorgan was hit by enemy fire, and 9 members of the ship's company were killed and 17 injured.
Dave was buried at sea, and I don't think I felt that I needed a funeral or whatever to fully accept that he was dead and gone. We did have a service here at the church in Llangolford, which I suppose did help, and family and friends were here.
There was no limping home for HMS Glamorgan. The only ship in the task force to survive an Exocet missile attack, she steamed defiantly towards Portsmouth this morning. The damage caused by the Exocet missile was considerable. It slewed across the deck, exploded in the hangar and kitchen area, killing 13 men and totally destroying the ship's Wessex helicopter. But amongst all the euphoria of the homecoming, the knowledge that some of the crew had died on active service.
After the ship came back, they had a service in Portsmouth, and I went to that. And I met the other members of the crew and their wives and that. And I mean, that was very difficult, because I think there was a certain amount of guilt almost from the other men that, you know, they had survived, and they were really sorry that, you know, Dave hadn't. At first, I had thought it was a good thing that, you know, we should go and fight our way through. And then, you see, it's all too easy to say, OK, because I've lost somebody, it wasn't a good idea. On balance, I suppose I still did believe that it was the right thing. And I wouldn't just change my opinion on that because it had happened to affect me very personally, very badly. Because, you know, as I said, you make your decisions on the knowledge you have at the time and the best reasons possible. And then you live with it. I suppose I was very conscious of losing a part of myself. And what I tried to concentrate on was, well, you know, before you met, when you were single, you were actually happy. And it was almost like having to regress back to that to then be able to go forward again. I mean, I've never consciously thought that I wouldn't sort of meet up with somebody else and remarry possibly and whatever. But the people that I have met subsequently inevitably you do compare, and you try not to, but when it really comes down to it, I'm afraid, I can't stop myself comparing. And so far, nobody's sort of matched up. So hence I'm still by myself. I'm not a great believer in going and visiting graves. When the person's dead, fine, their body's buried, but the body isn't them. It's everything else about them, and I suppose I just try and concentrate on the person that they were. I have my memories of Dave, and that's what I've got in me, and all the special times we had together, all the lovely memories, and that to me is what's important. So no trip to the Falklands.
Not the young fools, we tried to get in quite early, but no, they threw us out. I had to go when I was 18. I was an apprentice, and in 1980 they called me up when I had to go. Well, I eventually went to France in the June following. It was the first time to go into the trenches itself. And you get loaded up with all sorts of things. I had a 2-gallon can of water, 3 sets of Lewis gun ammunition around my neck, some mortar shells, and when I got out at the end, a sergeant was telling us off on me, and he was counting us off. And he said, give that big bastard some more. And they gave me a sack of bread. Sort of loading the donkey down. And you get into the line with that, because there's no other way of getting into the line, you see. There's no communications with traffic or anything like that. It's got to be carried. And also you have 350 rounds of ammunition in your equipment itself. That's a little heavy. When we first went into the line, we went in to take over the Berkshire Regiment. And of one company there was 29 men. That's all that came out. And they don't look like humans. We were the same when we came out. Your faces are all sallow. You look dejected. It looks awful, You get down to the lowest ebb of your life, in actual fact. And no sleep for about 8 days, and sometimes rations, sometimes not. Water, doubtful. Well, it's just awful. I mean, so you hardly worth thinking about, is it? I think there were 7 of us mates went over, 2 came back. That was the sort of numerical statistics that happened at that time. I tried to meet him. He was within 3 miles of me. And I went and found the regiment, but he'd gone up the line as an advance party as a Lewis gunner. So I missed him. And I didn't see him after that, because he got killed on the following week, as I got word did. I've got a photo at home with his grave and his number. And also in the village he's on the War Memorial. And I used to read the names out every Armistice Day on the service and give the exhortation afterwards for the Legion. thing that I say now, I say the exhortation, which is they shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, or the years condemn. The going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. I add after that, there is no winners in war, we're all losers. I've been to the Somme since. Now it's beautiful country with grass and stuff all over the place. You can't visualise it like it was before. No, I wouldn't go back now. It's 80 years on, isn't it, or more? So I can see their faces, but not quite as clear as they were. I feel horrible sometimes that I'm here and 100 years old and they were killed when they were in their prime. It's so unjust for them. For us, we were left behind. We were lucky to be alive anyway, so I accept that.
Eyewitness accounts of war as soldiers, munition workers and civilians tell their stories in the Great War Interviews. Watch on BBC iPlayer.